Hello readers, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about Black Leopard, Red Wolf, Book 1 in the Dark Star Trilogy by Marlon James, originally published in 2019. Before we dive into this review, I do want to give a content warning. This is an adult fantasy novel and has really graphic, sexual, and violent content, and we're going to be talking about some of those elements in the video today. Let's begin with the overview. A tracker recounts his journey to rescue a mysterious boy from danger, but powerful beings are working to ensure his journey is never completed and the boy remains lost. Now to go into the plot and pacing. The story is composed of different sections which account for portions of Tracker's life and his journey across a magical reimagining of Africa. Each section continues Tracker's quest and raises the stakes and dangers should the mission fail. This is a fast-paced adult fantasy novel. Now to move on to the characters. Firstly, we have Tracker. He's known only as Tracker, and what we know about him is that he has a nose. This is the main thing that he's described as. Other characters know him for from early on in the story. He's able to track because he has a really strong sense of smell. Tracker is a complex character who experiences loss multiple times throughout his life, from the loss of family to the loss of identity to losing his friends along his main journey within the story. It's hard to classify Tracker as outright good or bad, as in my opinion these labels are a little bit too simplistic for him. He certainly doesn't always do the right thing, but he isn't consumed by greed or power in the same way that a lot of the characters depicted in this world are. The next character is Leopard. Leopard is a shapeshifter and early friend of Tracker. As the name implies, Leopard can shift between a leopard and a man, but considers himself to be a cat first and foremost. The two meet when Tracker is a young man, and Leopard has a formative influence on Tracker through training him. And lastly, we have a group of characters, Sogalon, Sadogo, Mosi, etc. These are other really complex characters who join Tracker along various stages of his journey, and each of them has different levels of influence on his growth and success. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to be going into depth of each of these characters. Now let's talk about some of the themes found in this novel. Number one, we have the theme of found family. So often with this trope, there are elements of queerness. Tracker, Leopard, and many other characters Western audiences would consider to be gay. This is discussed somewhat in the book in terms of Tracker remarking certain places where gay relationships would not be accepted versus other environments where it might be more so commonly seen. The next theme found within the story is the idea of loneliness. Culturally, it seems to be really pervasive within this story. As we explore more and meet more and more people, it really seems like we don't find any happy families, so to speak. There's lots of descriptions of cheating spouses, of unlucky children, and the only real possible scenario I can think of where there is a happy family, the family is disbanded and taken apart. We have loneliness seen through aspects of the mother who's looking for her son, which is the main kind of adventure and element within the story. We have loneliness in that the leopard is looking for love and he's looking for sexuality. And then similarly to Leopard, but slightly removed, we have Tracker, who's also looking for love, but looking for more of a family. And it seems to me that, again, this kind of culturally consistent idea of unhappiness and loneliness and individuality seems to be pretty consistent throughout the story in terms of real selfishness seen among really all of the characters, I guess I would say. The next theme I want to talk about is power and how power is looked at in the story. So firstly, we see power through many different lenses. Power can be power over your personal fate, your life story and journey. power over another individual, power over a kingdom, or even power over an entire country. Take Tracker, for example. He only wants power over his own life and the fate to live the way he wants and choose his destiny and what he does with his time and his life. Tracker meets with other people who are slavers or who create wars for power, but Tracker struggles to fully view the reality of power within his own surroundings, namely in his misogyny. And I think his inability to fully grasp the big picture is really shown and characterizes him throughout the story, especially through this point. There's a quote in the story that says, "All you ever did was watch women suffer and blame her for it." Tracker is so inwardly focused that he ignores or is impartial to the struggles of others, and his loneliness and pain has turned into anger and bitterness, which both drive him and act as a means to further remove him from society, deepening the loneliness even further. The next theme within the story is ideas of religion and belief. Constant allusions to Tracker's disbelief despite the many wonders he's witnessed of gods, monsters, and everything else in between. His belief in F the gods, which ties back to his persistence in forging his own fate, acts as a foil to those both around him and to his refusal of common sense or reasoning when reviewing his own experiences. Next, let's talk about some of the good and the bad elements of the story. Firstly, I think that there's really great world building. I have a visual picture of the world and the characters who inhabit it, as well as a deep understanding of all of those characters' psyches, their motivations, what they look like, what they smell like. The author has really great descriptors of all of the senses, particularly smell, which makes sense as, again, Tracker has a nose, and that's one of his foremost ways of interpreting the world and being able to understand people and what drives, what motivates them, as well as their histories, all through this singular sense. So for us as a reader, it's a really visceral experience and an interesting way to understand a world, because I think using smell is certainly not something that you encounter a lot as a reader. Much more so you would think of visual or audio through reading, mental images of pictures being described, or what people are actually saying about something as a way to describe it. So that's a really interesting kind of mode of description, but I think it's also really effective. As I kind of alluded to earlier with the selfishness and misery of a lot of the people, in a lot of ways this world feels unlikable. The people that inhabit it feel unlikable. There's just a lot of selfishness and cruelty, which really is probably my biggest thing, is the amount of acts against women and children that happen in the story. It's really, really intense. And the language that's used can be pretty crude as well. So it takes a little while to kind of warm up to that sensibility that this is how the characters speak, this is the world that they live in, and it's their reality in terms of the way that their world works. But that is something to definitely keep in mind if you choose to read this story, is to be ready for that kind of content. Going into my final thoughts, overall I thought it was a really, really interesting story. It feels familiar to me to something like Anansi Boys, those kinds of African mythology inspired stories, where it also feels kind of unlike anything else I've ever read in terms of general fantasy stories. I feel like the author took some chances with this writing, and that they took a lot of time to really study and develop their world into something which feels real, despite the absurdity of the creatures which inhabit it. For me personally, just due to the graphic nature of a lot of the content in the story, I don't know that it's something that I personally would enjoy reading through the end of the trilogy, but I'm also not entirely sure where the story will lead from this point. If you're someone who really enjoys more gritty fantasy or African folk stories, this might be a really great pick for you. I would love to know if folks have read Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which is book 1 of the Dark Star trilogy, or book 2, which came out, I believe, last year or maybe the year before. Came out super recently. If you have read it, I would love to know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree with my points or disagree, and what you thought about the story overall, as well as if you've read anything else by Marlon James and your thoughts on him as a writer and his other work. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye.